In this video of the Historic Ordnance series, I have another Yugoslavian mine for you. This is actually one I had not been trained on. I wasn't aware of. I came across it literally yesterday when I was looking up some information on some other mines. I seen notes listed under them for the different ones used during the Bosnian Civil War. And decided, hey, I should check into this, and I found some really interesting info on this one. Now, what you are looking at here and here is a Yugoslavian PMR-U anti-personnel stake mine. Now, here's the kicker. You looking at this, you would think that this mine was actually a production mine that was already in service with the Yugoslavian military before the breakup and the Civil War started. It isn't. This mine is actually an improvised mine. Now, reportedly, these were not made in huge numbers, but a lot of them were produced. They were made in multiple different small workshops in multiple locations across the former Yugoslavia. They all followed essentially a similar design, so who knows, maybe this is based off of some type of blueprint from during the Cold War. That was something that was pretty common in Warsaw Pact countries or countries that were loosely tied to the Warsaw Pact country. For those of you that aren't aware of this, Yugoslavia was not in the Warsaw Pact. It was technically a neutral country, similar to Switzerland or Sweden, and it had ties with NATO and with the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union. And it was not uncommon in Eastern Europe especially that they would have essentially blueprints or manuals of different types of devices and weapons that could be made in home workshops should another world war happen. They learned in World War II when they were occupied by Nazi Germany that, hey, we need to have some idea on what to do if we don't have the proper equipment. How can we make stuff? And I have a feeling this thing was one of those blueprints, but I don't know for certain. Now, this mine is also listed when you look up things according to EOD and D-miners. It's also found under the designation PPMR-3. But most of the stuff, when you look it up, it is a PMR-U. Now, the sizes, the fuses used with them, and the explosive fillers vary greatly, but they're all, at least on sizes, they're close. And in appearance, they look the same. Construction is the same. That was noted by different D-miners and EOD. But generally, the diameter of the warhead here was 3 inches. Height was 4 inches of the main body, not including the fuse. The stake on it, as you can see here, was rebar or round stock, whatever they had available. And I estimate, going off some of the pictures here, that these stakes themselves were between 8 to 12 inches in length. And as you can see on the rebar here, they welded another piece of round stock to the side to be a support for the mine. And then on the top here, you had a little piece of metal welded that would go over the top of the mine here to help hold it in place on the stake. The mine body is made out of plastic. So someone literally was melting plastic and molding them into 2 separate halves for the body of the mine. The plastic bodies were typically found in green or black, like you see here. The steel fragments inside the body were encased in plaster. So they basically made the body, put a form inside here, filled around the form with bits of metal fragments of whatever was available, and then added some real liquidy plaster in around it and let it dry. The explosive filler inside here was also molded in a similar way. The weight on these mines were typically 3 to 4.5 pounds, of which the explosive compound was between 3 to 4 ounces in weight, and the explosive was typically either TNT, which is a commercial explosive, easier to get a hold of and would have been a bit easier to get smuggled into the former Yugoslavia from other locations, or they used whatever plastic explosive they could get a hold of. Could be C4, could be Comp B, could be Semtex, whatever they had available. The fuses on them also varied greatly. The most common was the UMP-1, which is this one here, which is a Yugoslavian copy of the Czech RO1 fuse. They're essentially the same. The RO1 was made out of plastic. The Yugoslavian here, most of them apparently were made out of metal. They also used the PMR-U, which is this one up here. And when you used this fuse, you had to use a separate detonator and attach it to it, and it used the M67. The UMP-1, the M67 detonator was already pre-attached at the factory and waterproofed, and it was packaged that way. With this fuse, it was a separate item. There is also notes that some of these mines were encountered with MUV series fuses out of Russia. Now, the standard pull to set off these different fuses was between 4 to 11 pounds, depending on the type of fuse that was used. The casualty radius on these mines was between 5 to 10 meters around the mine, and it varied greatly because of each mine was different as to the size of the steel fragments that were encased inside the body here and the number of those fragments. Russian sappers who had to do demining after the war, they were estimating that the actual kill radius for these mines was at most 3.5 meters away. So really close, a lot smaller kill radius than even a hand grenade. These mines were only produced in the 1990s during the Civil War. After the Civil War, existing stocks that had not been used inside Yugoslavia were destroyed. But this design has appeared apparently in Indonesia. I do not know if these are mines that were produced in Yugoslavia and smuggled out, or were these ones that are produced in Indonesia based on whatever blueprint this was made from. Now, the construction on how these were made, from what I can gather, the plastic was molded in local workshops. They did a top half and a bottom half. While in a metal shop, you had someone cutting and prepping the stakes for them. There is a note that on the bottom piece here, you see this little socket down here for the stake to get connected into. Inside this socket here was a small piece of pipe or bent rounded metal sleeve that would get pushed inside here, and then the plastic was put in around it. That was done to strengthen this to keep the head from busting off from the stake. On the top piece here was a hole that was created in it during the casting for the insertion of the fuse, and that fuse well was not threaded. It's just straight in and out. But they would go through, make the casting on the body pieces. They would then install the plaster and steel fragments inside this, and then the top half and bottom half were each packed with explosives. The top half They molded the explosive around a dowel in order to make a fuse well for whatever fuse would potentially be put inside there. Then the two halves were glued together here on this seam. When it was sent out to the field to be used, sent with the stake, the mine would get put on the stake in the field when it's in place. And looking at this picture down here, when I did more of a close-up on it online, you have a thicker piece of rebar here as the stake, and you can see they actually went and ground down the end of the rebar here to get the correct diameter for the socket on the mine body. And then you have here a picture of the general internals, the general construction of it. This I got from a Russian sapper website. Now this mine, it did remind me of an actual production one that I had to memorize decades ago. I had to look it up. It's very similar in appearance to the Yugoslavian PMR-3, which was an actual production anti-personnel mine made by the Yugoslavian military before the Civil War. Not a lot of them were produced, but they did end up in the hands by the different warring factions during the Civil War. And this, it looks a lot similar to it, but the difference between the two of them, this one has a plastic body here. The PMR-4, it's cast metal. Now, installation on these was incredibly simple. First, you go through, inspect the mine and the fuse. And if you're using the UPMR-2A, you also have to inspect the detonator. You also need to make sure you have a stake and a tripwire for emplacing the mine. Everything passes inspection. It was taken to the site where it was going to be emplaced. You find the location where you're going to put it, and typically you would put this mine on an area where you channelize the enemy to go through, like an alley, a forest path with close trees on either side that they can't, go around that location. Maybe a fence gate. Going through the gate, you would attach this potentially to the gate. That type of location, somewhere where the enemy is going to be close to the mine because it has such a small kill radius. First thing you're going to do, you're going to insert the metal stake into the ground to the height that's needed. Then you're going to attach the mine body to the stake, installing the stake into the socket, and then locking the little metal piece here over the top of the body to hold it in place. Then you're going to find the anchor point that you're going to attach the tripwire to. This could be a fence post, a tree, or another stake that you brought with you that you put in the ground. You're going to find that anchor point. You're going to attach the tripwire to it, and you're going to spool it back to the mine. At this point, you are then going to insert the fuse with detonator into the top of the mine. You just slided it right in there. Then you attach the tripwire to the pull ring on the appropriate fuse. Then at that point, you go through and you will remove the safety wire. On this one, the safety wire is right here going around. This one, the safety wire is here. Remove that safety wire. The mine is now armed. Then you would go through, camouflage the mine. There were notes that these mines were not always placed on stakes like you see here, where the stake was pretty much pounded down flat into the ground. The mines were also found attached to fence posts. They were also found attached to trees. They may not have used the stake itself. They just wired it to those locations. Now, removal on this. There actually is a note from Russian sappers that they considered these a little too twitchy, and they were recommending just destroy them in place. But they said you could disarm them, but it took someone who really knew what they were doing. So, first thing you're going to do, locate the mine, which could be hidden in vegetation like here. You're going to check around that mine for any other booby traps or anti-personnel mines that could be buried or hidden nearby. Take care of those as you come across them. Make your way up to the mine itself. You're going to uncover it. You're then going to check both ends of the tripwire to see if there's mines or booby traps on both ends. If there isn't, you then go back to the mine here and you're going to attach safety wire around the fuse, locking the pull ring in place. At that point, you can go through and cut the tripwire. Then pull the fuse out of the top of the mine, set it to the side. Then remove the mine from the stake, pull the stake from the ground, turn everything into the mine dump for either disposal or reuse. Now, the chance of actually coming across an actual PMR-U or PMR-U stake mine is down near zero, unless you're in Indonesia. However, because of the simplicity of this design, it was made for production in little local workshops in small communities. The chance of this making an appearance again someday in some conflict is pretty high because it's a really simple design. So this is one you should be able to recognize and understand how to disable it. And how to disable it really depends on what fuse is installed in there. If it's using a MUV series fuse, not the original MUV1 or MUV fuse, it's using a 2 or a 3 or a 4 or whatever, those 2, 3s, 4s, those are not meant to be deactivated. You need to destroy the mine in place at that point, because messing with the tripwire, you run the risk that you could set off the mine. So I can understand then why the Russian sappers said then to do not attempt to disarm these fuses unless you have a really experienced engineer with you or deminer with you who understands how to properly do it, how to identify the different components of the mine here to determine, can it be disarmed or must it be destroyed in place. Now keep in mind, when it comes to stake mines, it was not uncommon that the Viet Cong and earlier the Soviets, they may booby trap the stake itself. They may put a hand grenade next to it, and that stake holds the spoon on the grenade. And when you pull the stake out of the ground, that safety lever, the spoon, moves just enough to allow that grenade to activate. So that would be something to keep in mind. Now, for all my engineer brothers in the Patriot and militia movements, always remember essay-ons.